Hello, thanks very much for watching. Quick one today on natural moral law applied to lying, because I realised I hadn't done a lot of videos applying natural moral law to any ethical issues. And I thought this might be the one to do, because with natural moral law, lying's a little bit of a quirky one, because it's not perhaps as straightforward as some of the others. And there's a few things that Aquinas actually says that it's really worth knowing to help you write a really good essay about this. So we're going to start by figuring out whether Aquinas would ever consider it okay to lie. And we can do that just based on what we know about natural moral law. So think about your primary precepts. Which of those might be violated if a person was to tell a lie? So remember your 5 primary precepts that Aquinas sets out. Those are like goals for living a good life, goals that people will aim to fulfill if they want to thrive and if they want to achieve eudaimonia, which is human flourishing. So that's the most important thing, your primary precepts. From then you get secondary precepts. But there's another thing to bear in mind as well with natural moral law, and that's the virtues. So they're not as important as the primary and secondary precepts, but Aquinas still really valued them because he thought they were a good tool to help you in tricky situations. So we're asking, what do the rules of natural moral law say? But we're also asking, what sort of person would you be if you were lying? So what I've done here is I've tried to walk you through a few different reasons why natural moral law would oppose lying. Spoiler alert, because that's what it does. So let's start with the obvious one. The primary precepts of living in an ordered society. If you're living in an ordered society, that means that things are predictable, things are ordered, obviously. And surely that's only achievable if people can trust each other. So you have to be able to trust that people are telling each other the truth. Therefore, to be able to trust each other, we have to not tell lies. So we've reasoned our way there to this secondary precept at the bottom, the blue one, do not tell lies. So that's how we can get there in a straightforward way. A slightly less obvious one, but I still think it works, is to educate children. So if the goal is to educate your children to be well-functioning human beings, it follows that you've got to give them a moral education. You've got to instill good values in them. And I think you'd find it hard to find someone who say that they're raising their child to be a liar, because parents don't like being lied to, teachers don't like being lied to, and frankly, I don't think you guys like being lied to either. You might do it sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it's the best choice. So as you can see on the green strand, we end up in exactly the same place. Secondary precept, do not tell lies. So that's how we get there using a couple of the primary precepts. We can also do it with the virtues. So if we pick 2 of Aquinas' cardinal virtues, prudence, which is practical wisdom, and possibly more importantly here, justice, which is all about fairness, developing the virtues helps people get moral decisions right. So to really be a skillful user of the primary and secondary precepts, you need to have the virtues as well. So a person would ask, am I being wise and am I being fair? I think we'd have to agree that most of the time, and yes, we could think of exceptions, but most of the time, wise and fair people don't make a habit of telling lies. So a virtuous person wouldn't lie. That shows us that lying is wrong. So we've got there in 3 different ways. And you might be thinking, well, I knew it was going to end up like that. Yes, but it's always good in an essay if you can explain why. Maybe not in this length. In an essay, you wouldn't have to walk through all 3 of these. But if you did maybe the blue one, that would prove that you understand how a user of natural moral law gets to the conclusion that lying is wrong. So we could also do it this way. It violates the primary precepts of living in an ordered society. It violates the secondary precept, do not bear false witness, do not tell lies. The do not bear false witness, I'm using there the wording of the Bible because that's in the Ten Commandments, but it's coincidental that it's in the Ten Commandments. It's backed up by scripture, but it's not that it's not important that it's backed up by scripture, but in some ways it doesn't really matter because Aquinas doesn't think you should get your morality from the Bible. He thinks you should get your morality through reason. He thinks you can work it out without ever opening a Bible. But then if you did open a Bible, it would back you up. And fourthly, it violates the cardinal virtue of justice. We should always aim to be just. We should always aim to be fair. If we're lying to someone, we're not being fair. Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting because we need to look at a couple of quotes from Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. Now, before you panic, you would not be expected to bust these quotes out in the exam. They're not expecting that level of detail. But it is worth just knowing what he says and having that in the back of your head, because lying's the one that's not like the others. He's got very, very strong views on lying and he talks about it a lot. So I just want to highlight a few things here. So he uses words like unnatural and undue. So the whole sentence, it's unnatural and undue for anyone to signify by words something that's not in his mind. So what Aquinas is basically saying there is that he finds it almost inhuman that someone would misrepresent themselves. He thinks it shows that you're not really functioning correctly. And he ends that bit with a quote that you probably can learn, therefore every lie is a sin. So for Aquinas, there are no good lies. He thinks that if you're lying, you are misrepresenting yourself to others, you are misrepresenting yourself to God, and that is never okay. And he's not even done yet. He goes on to say, a lie is sinful not only just because it injures one's neighbour, but also on account of its inordinateness. I'll highlight that word. That's not a word that we use a lot, but it means sort of outrageousness. Now, it is not allowed to make use of anything inordinate or outrageous in order to ward off injury. Therefore, it is not lawful to tell a lie in order to deliver another from any danger whatever. So, in other words, even if it's a life or death situation, Aquinas wouldn't think it was okay to tell a lie. But then this next bit is interesting. Nevertheless, it's lawful to hide the truth prudently by keeping it back. So you're not allowed to lie, but you also don't have to say anything. You don't have to tell the whole truth either. You could maybe not say anything, or you could tell a version of the truth that perhaps isn't the whole truth, but you can't deliberately say something you know to not be true. This is where people start to struggle with this complete ban on lying. Because if we were in a life and death situation, it just seems daft to think that you couldn't lie to save somebody's life. Lots of other ethical thinkers would say that in those cases, you can lie to save somebody else's life. Probably not Kant, but the rest of them, Fletcher, Bentham, even maybe Aristotle. And the Catholic Church has really run with this. There don't seem to be any exceptions that the Catholic Church can carve out. So this is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So this was after Aquinas, this was later. Lying is the most direct offence against the truth. To lie is to speak or act against the truth in order to lead into error someone who has the right to know the truth. By injuring man's relation to truth and his neighbour, a lie offends against the fundamental relation of man and of his word to the Lord. So this is not only about lying is bad for relationships between people, it's bad for your relationship with God. So it's really one of the worst things you can do, according to Aquinas. This is where people start to get like they can't get on board with this, because many people may not like lying, but many people do it, and many people would say, well, there's far worse things in life. That's not an insane conclusion to draw. but it is worth thinking about what happens when people start to lie all the time. What happens when lying becomes not a big deal? Then we can be in difficult situations. So if you were evaluating this, you could pick up on some of these points. So something that I quite like exploring with my classes is to wonder if Aquinas is just being inconsistent by saying that there are exceptions that are made for stealing, because he does carve out some of those, but none can be made for lying. Why does he do that? Why is one so much worse than the other? He doesn't really say, and we can pull him up on that. We can challenge that. There's a debate to be had on whether lying really is the worst thing. Is it worse than stealing? Is it worse than killing? What about his misleading truth or keeping back the truth thing? Is that just a kind of silly ethical workaround based on the idea that he can't really defend this idea that lying is so bad? And also, this kind of example is crying out for an exploration of proportionalism, which you might remember was a later iteration of natural moral law. What might a proportionalist say? They might say something like, in a life and death situation, you weigh up the value and the disvalue, and you go with the least bad option. Now, that might be to tell a lie. Doesn't mean that you've done a good thing, but you've done the least bad of all the bad options, and that should be available to you. Okay, I'm going to end that one there. Thank you very much. I hope that's helped. We're getting close-ish to the exam now, so there'll be more videos dropping in the next few days, I hope. Feel free to ask for anything that I haven't covered, but do check out the rest of the channel because there's some really useful stuff there. Work hard, look after yourselves.